So I'm here at the beach. I'm doing my devotional, and I've been reading Psalm 145. And verse 20 in particular kind of struck me. And it says, and I'm reading from the Message, it says, God sticks by all who love him, but it's all over for those who don't. And I wonder how many of us sort of celebrate when we hear or read those words that it's all over for those who don't. I think we celebrate because I think we know who those are, those ones who it's all over for. But I also wonder how many of us don't recognize that as soon as we think that, believe it in our hearts, that we know who those ones are, that it's all over for, that we, in that thinking, we are those ones. And when we get into that place where we think we're the ones that are loved by God, that we're favored, and that we're not those ones, we feel entitled, we feel empowered, that we are standing in God's favor, and therefore we are entitled to inflict vengeance on those who are those ones, right? We think that we have the power and authority of God to take those kinds of actions, to speak those kinds of words that hurt and harm and seek vengeance. Never mind that we forget that God says, vengeance is mine. It makes me think of Genesis chapters 1 and 2, when God created and looked at all of creation and said that it was good. I think that one of the things that we must do before we continue is we need to check our egos at the cover of the Bible with it closed and really determine where we are and who we are before we continue. And once we do that, once we pull that cover open and begin to read Genesis chapters 1 and 2, we need to look at what our definition of good really is. And if we've checked our egos before we started, then we have the courage to kind of consider, really, the greater context of Scripture, of God's story, and let that inform and evaluate our definitions. Is our definition of good embodying that goodness? Does our definition embody love? Does it embody grace and mercy? Does our definition really reflect the greater story of who God is, knowing that God is love? God's story begins with love, and God's story ultimately ends with love. And then we're at a place where we can reflect this definition of good that we have. Who is this good for? Is it good for you? Or is it good for me? Or is it something more profound? So if it's good for you, that's where you start, it's good for you, then I think the invitation would be for you to close the Bible and start all over again. Check your ego and begin again. And if your definition for good, or who it's good for, doesn't start with God, and therefore good for others and all of creation, your starting place is skewed. And let's be honest with ourselves. We really need to do that ego check every single time we open the Bible. It's something powerful to read, to understand that God created me, created you, created all of creation, and said that it was good. And so today, as I sit on this beach, I have to be honest. It's really hard for me to really grab a hold that God created us human beings and said we are good, because you know what? I kind of think people suck right now. Well, I guess that means I need to go back, close my Bible, and start again. Because if I don't start all over and go back and check my ego, I too will be one who goes ahead and thinks I'm entitled to vengeance and entitled to take anyone and everyone out who does not fall under my definition of what is good and what is favored in God.